Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed, Le'olam va'ed. Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la.
הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. 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 How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב
Please be seated. Esa enai el heharim, me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz. On this day, this bright and blustery morning, first day of spring, we turn our eyes to the mountains and we ask God for help. We ask God for help to traverse this valley of shadows that has descended upon us, that we now feel, having lost our mother and mother-in-law, our grandmother, our loving companion, our friend, Sybil Steinberg. So welcome, friends, to Temple Israel. Welcome to all those of you who are here in the seats of our sanctuary, and welcome to those of you who join us via the live stream, whether locally or in Florida or elsewhere. This is a beautiful gathering of Sybil's family and friends. It is a beautiful gathering of those who are pillars of this Temple Israel congregation, as Sybil was for many years, a member here since 1961. And on this morning, or in recent days, we may have been prompted to ask, why? Sybil was so very healthy and vibrant until so recently. Christy noted that she was as intellectually and culturally engaged as anyone at any age. My wife, when she heard that Sybil had passed, said, wait, I just saw Sybil recording her podcast at the library a few weeks ago. I said, might have been more than a few weeks ago, but still, the point holds. The why, I would suggest, is not about Sybil's passing. The why is about her life. Why was she here? She was here to bring beauty and truth and insight and learning and love, so much love, into this world. She was here to live a life of goodness and blessing. She was here to create and build a family that has grown from 2 to 5, 8 grandchildren, and God willing will one day continue to grow. And she was here to leave an impact and a legacy that we now all take on the responsibility of carrying forward. And so we will remember our beloved Sybil Steinberg with great love, lots of honor, and yes, laughter too. Today, this evening, in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. And so although death has taken our beloved mother and mother-in-law and grandmother and loving companion and friend, although our world is a bit darker, although our friends here in the front row may shed a tear in sorrow, God, we give thanks for everything to this world and to our lives and to this congregation and to this Westport community that she loved so much. God, we thank you for Sybil's love that brought us together so many times throughout her life and which brings us together this morning. We thank you for the companionship that we shared with her along the path of our own lives. We thank you for the tender memories that we bring today to this place. We thank you for the many gifts of her heart and her mind, both her heart and her mind, which brought us joy and happiness and which are now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to you, dear God. And we turn to the words of our Psalms. Adonai ma'adam v'teda'ehu, ben enosh v'techashvehu, Adam lahevel dama, yamav katzelover. O God, what are we that you should take regard for us? What are we that you should be mindful of us? We are merely like a breath to you, O God. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come up in the morning of our lives, renewed like grass, and in the evening of our lives we fade and wither. You cause each of us to return to dust. You say, return, O mortal creatures, from where you came. We wish that we were wiser, that we understood more about where we are going. But we know this: when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory remains here in the hearts and minds of those we have befriended and loved. And so we take note of the wholehearted and the upright, which Sybil surely was. And we know that she shall have peace. Amen. This 23rd Psalm, which we're about to share, is the biblical poet's vision of the perfect life, a life of peace and fulfillment, comfort and ease and happiness. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot desha yarbitzeni, amei menuchot yenachaleni, nafshi yishovev. Yancheni v'magle tzedek lema'an shemo, gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo ira ra, ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai, Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi rivaya, ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni kol yamei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai la'orech yamim. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God helps me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. God, you lead me in the right paths for the sake of your name. And even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me, God. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Amen. And our final selection from our ancient words of wisdom this morning from the book of Ecclesiastes. L'chol zman ve'et l'chol chafetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut, et latat ve'et la'kornatua, et lifrotz ve'et livnot, et livkot ve'et lischok, et spod ve'et rekot. For every single thing, there is a season. There's a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And so indeed, speak we shall of our beloved Sybil, who was wife of the late Dr. Hal Steinberg of blessed memory, mother of Jonathan and Nancy, of Peter and Susanna, of Richard and Christy, grandmother of Rachel, Margot, Matthew, Charlotte, Nicole, Ari, Jacob, and Isaac, and loving partner of Matt Sagal. I'll just share one brief note. Sybil once had a chance, recently I think, had a chance to fill out an online, I don't know, I want to call it a game, but it's not really a game. A form. How do you want to be remembered? It asked. And so, how did Sybil want to be remembered? She wanted to be remembered for her love of books, which I am sure will be mentioned many, many times. It was her love of books, I hope the story will be told, that enabled Hal to take note of her and switch place cards at a wedding so that he could sit next to her. And thus, we're all here today. She wanted to be remembered for her appreciation of the transcendent power of opera. It was, I'm told, in books and opera that she would seek shelter from the three noisy and rambunctious boys who filled her home. She wanted to be remembered for her favorite flowers. And I would add that beyond that, Sybil was always a lady of class and style and sophistication. I see some heads nodding out there. She wanted to note that her favorite foods were raspberries, oysters, and rye bread with butter. We hope not on the same plate. And most importantly, she noted, she was so lucky to have been wed to a good and loving husband, and then to have met Matt at Bayport Club. And what began as a friendship developed into something romantic. They were loving partners to one another these last several years. She wanted to be, also on this most important list, she wanted to note that she was so very proud of her three sons and their spouses. And she wanted her grandchildren to know that they expanded her life eightfold, providing endless joy and so very much pride. And so now we invite Sybil's closest and dearest to share a few words here on the bima. We welcome Jonathan Steinberg to the bima. Oh, sure. I'm gonna get you some water and tissues.
Thank you all for joining us here today. I know Mom would be very gratified to have you all share the celebration of a wonderful, fully lived life. And I think she'd be very comfortable with a standing room only crowd. If you've ever been to a Sybil's List reading. I want to thank the rabbi for his kind and very insightful words, and all the staff at Temple Israel who have helped us, as well as those from Abraham Green Home. Steinberg, huh? Are you related to Sybil Steinberg? There may even be a couple people here today who are surprised to make that connection. I used to get that all the time. I can't tell you how proud I was to admit that I was her son. Trying to suppress a big smile, I'm not much for one for smiles, as the person embarked on a litany of admiring anecdotes about how amazing she is or was. Yep. Mom led a full life, which is much more than just her 90 years on with us. Her reputation in every aspect was earned, sometimes the hard way. I can only imagine what it was like for someone with her evident talents to sublimate them for many years. She was the epitome of the dutiful daughter, wife, and mother. Growing up in Bridgeport and Fairfield, she doted on her brother Aaron and worked hard at everything, fretting about failing exams that turned out she was the only one who got an A. Excelling at Smith, at that time filled with remarkable women who went on to great things. That was Mom in her element. She was a consummate housewife, taking care of 3, as the rabbi said, rambunctious boys, throwing large and sometimes raucous parties. Does anybody do aquavit parties anymore? I think it's time for them to come back. And enduring her invisibility as her 4 men watched sports virtually right through her because the TV was behind her. Her refuge was her den. No matter whatever chaos was going on in the rest of the house, you would enter the sanctuary of the den where opera and literature reigned. Almost by osmosis, I still kind of prefer classical music to all other forms. And by the way, all of us read books. Mom carried it off with great aplomb. She was stylish in a way that reminded me of Audrey Hepburn. Little breakfast at Tiffany's, a little too for the road. As befits the daughter of shoe store owners, she was always outfitted with great handbags and shoes. She shared her mother's love of jewelry of all kinds, and her love of clothes was demonstrated by the sheer number of outfits she needed to bring with her to Florida every winter, befitting an empress on tour. Speaking of tours, she and Dad were dedicated jet setters. I used to joke that they had been everywhere on the planet twice. Vacations to exotic climes, sometimes to destinations not yet catering to tourism, were one of their great joys. And they went out of their way to share their love of travel, first with us and then with their grandkids, going on such trips as well. I know that each of the grandkids particularly cherishes the time they spent with her. Alas, Mom never got the great-grandchildren she would have liked, but she did get the next best thing, great-grand cats. Although she couldn't justify getting another cat after the famous midnight, we could spend an hour talking about midnight, she enjoyed vicariously all of the 8 kitties distributed among us, often sitting on the floor, despite her bad back, to encourage the cats to engage her. We all love cats. She was okay with dogs too, Peter. Back to the earlier years, I mentioned how she endured the limited role of housewife with seeming equanimity, but not always. I will never forget how she would arrive home from errands on a Saturday and screech at us with incredulity as we boys, still lounging on the couch at 11 a.m. in our pajamas, watching cartoons, and her justified frustration about the endless attrition of valued antiques we destroyed in the course of inside football, baseball, hockey, and fencing. That's a lot of sacrifice. But she was biding her time, taking on volunteer leadership roles, getting her master's in education, beginning to review books. She secured a job at Publishers Weekly, quickly proving her mettle. Imagine getting paid for reading 5-6 books a week, something she would have done for free. Given her lifelong love of books, it shouldn't be surprising that she ultimately distinguished herself in book reviewing, forecasting, and editing. And when Barbara Bannon ended her own career, toast to Barbara, Mom finally came into her own, becoming a real player in the publishing industry as senior fiction editor for Publishers Weekly. She wrote pithy, insightful reviews and interviewed the great authors of the day, from Philip Roth to Salman Rushdie, during the Fatwa. I didn't even know he could be nominated for a Pulitzer in literary criticism. What a career, particularly one so postponed. I just want to read one quote from one of her colleagues at PW. Sybil, no last name required, as there simply was no other Sybil, was a literary kingmaker. Her decision to feature or ignore, praise or pummel, embrace or dismiss any given book was something no one in publishing could afford to take for granted. She was a powerhouse. And she decided to keep it going with Sybil's List at the library, rendering reviews with haiku-like precision. Mom always kept busy with her memoir group and other affinities and scheduled more lunches and dinners in a week than we'd have in 6 months. But there was something missing after Dad died. She was particularly blessed when Matt and she decided to hook up. She loved it when I told others that she had a new main squeeze. Matt, thank you so much for what you brought back into her life. We're glad you're planning to stay in Westport. You're ours now. I could go on and on, but I will end with Mom, the warrior. Not warrior, warrior. Like any mother, she worried constantly about her 3 boys, my college adventures, our career prospects, and would any of us ever get married? Well, we all did better on that score than she could have expected. Nancy, Christy, Susanna, we'd all be helpless without you. Still boys in pajamas on the couch. And then I gave her something to worry about that she would never have expected, running for office. I could virtually hear Mom grinding her teeth, and she had problematic teeth to start with, about any negative comments thrown my way in the media. She worked the phones at Democratic Town Committee headquarters like a pro, unwilling to accept that anyone would refuse to vote for me. She was my most stalwart supporter. She enjoyed being the mother of Jonathan Steinberg every bit as much as I relished being the son of Sybil Steinberg. I will miss her constantly. I will talk to her in my head, as I do with Dad sometimes. And we will all talk of her and her loves, her men, her books, and her cats, not necessarily in that order. I love you, Mom.
Welcome Richard to the Bema.
Unlike John, I may not be as well known here in the Westport community. I'm not run for office, and I don't currently live on this coast. I'm a Californian as of the last 3 years or so. But speaking of states, I hope people don't take too much offense to this, but I feel compelled to share with you that I'm really not a big fan of the state of Florida. I'm not particularly fond of their politics. I mean, who would love that? Humidity, the bugs, Florida, not for me. Even the food, the Cuban food, it's not working. Sorry, Bayport people, I know you're watching on the live stream, but I really am not fond of Florida. But perhaps my feelings about the state of Florida are a bit biased. After all, I've spent the last 3 weeks and 2 weeks before that in Sarasota in hospitals and hospices, sharing time with my family and Matt. Matt's been great, struggling with the most serious of life's eternal questions. How does one handle the end of one's life in the most dignified fashion? Now, as you may remember, I have a bit of deja vu when it comes to this. I spent 8 years ago in the same hospitals and the same hospices as my father passed in the state of Florida. So perhaps Florida and I don't get along. However, my personal dislike of Florida has absolutely nothing to do with the person we're here to remember, my dear mother, Sybil. And Sybil, in contrast to my feelings, absolutely loved being in Florida. Her Bayport neighbor, Joanne, hopefully you're listening, shared with us just a few days ago that her time there, especially the last 2 years with Matt, were euphoric. Each new year would approach as she relished the thought of heading down to Longboat Key and being with her close friends at Bayport, attending lectures, musical events, and sharing meals with her close-knit group of friends in lively and challenging conversations. Regarding sharing meals, and clearly is what is the bitterest of all ironies, health issues in Florida are intricately entwined. She'd been experiencing trouble ingesting food for quite some time and had serious incident at the end of December. And when I called her to check on how she was doing, how she was recovering, she didn't want to talk about that. She wanted to talk about, can I still go to Florida? That's all she cared about. Health be damned, I got to get myself to Florida. That was the top priority, was getting down there. And so Florida it was. Now, I'd spent a fair amount of time with her in Florida. That was quite bittersweet, happy and sad. As you know, most of you know, she was 1,000% with it up to the very end. She stayed up to date on current affairs, the world affairs, how things were going on with her friends and neighbors. She was all with it. So we shared many, many good times, stories, laughs, talking about her 90 years up to this point. But perhaps the hardest thing for me to do when I was down there was listening in to her final conversations with her far-flung friends and relatives and her grandchildren. It was very hard for me to comprehend that this was the finality of those conversations. They would never have the chance to speak again. Those conversations teared me up. But Mom was cheerful and smiling in every one of those conversations. She shared memories and provided guidance and best wishes to those whose lives would continue after she passed. It was really very, very sweet listening in. Very hard for me, though. Not to mention all the texts and emails that we received when word spread that she was ailing. The kind of sentiments shared by her friends and far-flung colleagues were extremely heartwarming. So much love and respect for such an accomplished woman who achieved so much during her well-lived 90 years. To be perfectly honest, I didn't quite realize how accomplished she was and how successful she was. I was still in high school when she started commuting into the city to work at PW. As far as I could tell, she was just Mom going to a job. I now recognize how fortunate and accomplished she was. She had a job that she was born for, educated for, a job that gave her great pleasure, a job surrounded by books and authors and smart people who shared her passion for literary matters. How fortunate she was. How much pleasure she experienced being in the publishing business, all the way up to her final days. One of my best memories about my mother involves books, as you might expect. When I was living alone in California, with not much going on in my life in my 20s and 30s, On a regular basis, I'd get a package in the mail. One of those padded envelopes, then, when you pull the zip tie, all that little asbestos-like padding comes out and threatens you with cancer. The envelope was always filled with books, mostly galleys, fiction and nonfiction. Often car books, that's my thing, car books, which I especially appreciated and added to what became an extensive collection of automotive titles. These books kept me occupied during my single days and actually played a critical role in my love life, as I shared books with my future wife, Christy, and we bonded over books that we shared with each other that came from my mother. I believe it was the shipping news, Annie Proulx, that we initially bonded over. We also bonded over some lesser titles, a book called Signals of Distress, another maritime novel that was quite overwhelmingly depressing, to be honest, but we do remember it to this day, so books was part of our life. My mother shared much with us over the years. Her legacy extends throughout the family, as all of her children and grandchildren, as John mentioned, love books, love cats, love travel, and love the finer things in life. Now, not all of her passions extended into future generations. Opera, for instance, didn't make it. But it does stir up a memory of Saturday mornings. She'd be in the kitchen listening to that ancient RCA radio, blasting arias and whistling atonally to the music. Terrible, terrible tonal sense. And again, that didn't quite translate down to her children or her grandchildren, to my knowledge. So, my lack of fondness for Florida notwithstanding, I have only wonderful memories and feelings about my mother's 90 years of life. She accomplished more than most in her time, and loved and respected by many. She had an active life all the way up to the end, and a calendar full of activities that a 62-year-old would envy. Mom, we're very proud of you. We love you so much. You will be missed. Rest in peace. You've earned it.
We invite Sybil's dear friend, Mary Lou Weissman, to the bema.
Sybil and I are, must I say were close friends. During our last phone call from the hospital, she asked me to speak at her funeral. So here I am, hoping that I can give her extraordinary life some measure of the honor that it deserves. I didn't know Sybil until we were both in our 60s. It's unusual for two very grown-up adults to become so close, but we had already lived parallel lives that primed us to be friends. We were both born in Fairfield County in the 30s and raised in the 40s and 50s, decades before the second wave of feminism. That meant that both of us married right out of college, Sybil to a doctor, me to a lawyer, and then, as was expected, had our children. When Sybil graduated from Smith College, summa cum laude, and Phi Beta Kappa, Doubleday immediately offered her an entry-level job. She turned it down in favor of a marriage. Still, she was restless. For 2 decades, she attended PTA meetings, wrote articles for the local paper, taught part-time at the famous writer's school, and freelanced for a number of prominent publications. But Sybil was a woman who needed a career, a big, demanding career. She found it at Publishers Weekly, where she quickly became a star. After she retired, Sybil gifted the citizens of Westport with Sybil's List, which filled the library, often to standing room only. The mood was worshipful. The list, which was culled from the hundreds of books she read each year, included fiction and nonfiction, memoirs, and poetry. To say that Sybil was well-read hardly describes her passion. Along with her other fans, I would sit, the list on my lap, pencil in hand, checking the ones I wanted to read. Her choices were prophetic. Later, reviewers at the New York Times would often recommend the same books. For readers, Sybil's taste and wisdom is irreplaceable. She was also a first-class blurber. For those of us who wrote books she really liked, she would use her literary influence to pen a few elegant words of back-cover praise. For her many friends, Sybil acted as an informal lending library. Long after she retired from Publishers Weekly, books were landing on her doorstep. At least one of her closets at home was stacked to overflowing with pre-publication books, even manuscripts from publishers worldwide who continued to seek her reviews. It didn't matter that she had read them all. They had to be returned to her because she might want to read them again. And besides, there were a couple of friends on her waiting list. There's so much more to be said about Sybil's contributions to Westport's literary life, but I wanted to find a way to get close and personal with Sybil herself. Then I remembered that I had saved some of her most recent emails, so I reread them, and hoping that her own words, her regular workaday thoughts and feelings would evoke her vital spirit. For instance, this year, Sybil had invited her granddaughter Rachel and her partner, who lived in freezing Minnesota, to visit her at Longboat Key. She wanted to give them a few weeks of warmth and sunshine. And she wrote this to me. I promoted their visit as a warm alternative to Duluth, but instead, the temperature barely made it out of the 60s. The weather here really sucks. And that seems so un-Sybil-like, didn't it? But she said it. The weather really sucks, and I'm bedridden. When this is over, I've got to make sure I send them someplace warm. It was so typical of Sybil's generous nature to think of others first. Back in Westport, Sybil's refrigerator door is fully decorated to the margins with photographs of her grandchildren. Whenever Jonathan ran for office, she summoned her army of friends and cajoled them into making dozens of cold calls to Westport Democrats to get out the vote. Jonathan didn't need our calls, but Sybil had been nervous for weeks, and we wanted to calm her down. Sybil loved her family fiercely, and they loved her back. As has been mentioned, Sybil loved to travel. This September, before she left for Longboat Key, she wrote, "Next week begins with Kol Nidra services on Sunday, followed by all day in temple on Monday, followed by frantic packing on Tuesday, followed by a flight to San Diego on Wednesday, where we'll be running around until October 4th. And the latest travel plan has us going to Boston for 4 days, for the 8th through the 11th. Meanwhile, we'll rendezvous with 2 couples we went to Puerto Rico with, and with Maddie's granddaughter, who's doing her medical internship at Beth Israel. Later in the month, we fly to Chicago, but I don't want to think about that now." Sybil was culturally indefatigable. Here's a message she emailed me early this year from Longboat Key, where she regularly participated in a modern-day salon. She and her friends delighted one another with conversations about books, politics, and entertainment. Last night, Sybil wrote, the Sarasota Orchestra did a terrific performance of Mahler's First. Today at 1 p.m., we see the Metropolitan Opera HD of Carmen. Then we're meeting friends for dinner, followed by a young artist's concert. Tomorrow I'm going to the ballet with friends, and Matt is cooking dinner for us. Oh, and did I forget to tell you? I've joined an aerobics class. Sybil was more than just a pretty face and an astonishing intellect. She was stylish. She had great taste. When I was particularly impressed by how she was dressed, I'd ask where she got that particular sweater, and was it cashmere? She was always way too happy to tell me that she'd bought most of her clothes at Loehmann's, and when they went out of business, that she graduated to Goodwill. Our emails flew back and forth, and during the winter, when she emailed me from Longboat Key, it was there that she met Matt Sybil. They entered what she announced quite formally as a committed relationship. He filled the last 2 years of her life with unexpected joy. And finally, it will not surprise any of you to learn that during her hospitalization, she emailed me one last book recommendation. It hadn't been published yet, but as always, she was reading an advance copy. The book, she told me, is a memoir by Sloane Crosley. It is entitled Grief is for People. I'm pretty sure you'll want to read it, she wrote. Crosley's voice is acerbic, dark, funny. I can't put it down. The irony is not lost on us. Grief at her passing is indeed for people like us. I will miss her always.
We welcome Matt Sybil to the bima.
For those of you who don't know me, I am Matt Sybil. I had the privilege of being Sybil's companion for the last 2 years. Sybil, my late wife, Reva, and I were winter friends in Bayport in Longboat Key, Florida, for a long time. After my wife's death in the spring of 2021, Sybil and I became pen pals by email and phone while I was living in Salem, Massachusetts, and Sybil was in her Westport home. One thing led to another, and by early 2022, just 2 years ago, I found myself relocating to Westport to start sharing our lives together. Those of you who know me have heard me tell many Sybil and Matt stories, which usually were accompanied by Sybil's eye rolling as she heard me tell the same stories for the 100th time. I will resist the temptation to tell them all, but I will tell you my favorite Sybil and Matt story. Our first date was on February 2nd, 2022, in Longboat Key, Florida. I had made a reservation at an upscale restaurant in Longboat Key. I arrived at Sybil's door in her unit at the agreed time and rang the bell. When Sybil opened the door, she looked me up and down and asked, "Do you have a blue blazer?" I was wearing what I thought was a Florida-appropriate windbreaker for a chilly evening. Yes, but in response to her question, I said, yes, I have a blue blazer back in my unit. If I had said, no, I don't have a blazer, the last 2 years wouldn't have happened. I went back, put on the blazer, went back to her unit, rang the bell again. She again opened the door, looked me up and down, and said, "That's much better." Off we went to the restaurant. Upon arrival, the place was jammed full. Our table was ready for us. After sitting down to eat, I looked around and eyeing the other men. I walked around the restaurant and went back to the table, and here's the trivia question. How many men were wearing jackets in that restaurant? The answer, as some of you know, is one, me. When I asked Sybil why I had to wear a blazer when no one else was, she gave me the famous Sybil glare and said, "Because you're with me." That, of course, was the first salvo in an ongoing war to get me to dress more appropriately. She didn't understand that I thought a stained sweatshirt was perfectly okay for a geezer to wear to a fine restaurant. Over the 2 years together, she completely revamped my wardrobe, and I learned to avoid confrontations by presenting myself for inspection before we went out anywhere. Lots of other stories, but I'll spare you those. After 2 years, let me assure you, however, that Sybil's notoriously early morning grouchiness is greatly overstated. It is true, however, that she learned to avoid my daily rants after I read the New York Times about Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump by leaving off her hearing aids and pretending not to hear me. Every day I had with Sybil was a joy. As everyone knows, she was a brilliant, knowledgeable, beautiful, accomplished, and witty woman. I must add that some of her wit was not suitable for a family audience. In addition to being a loving wife to Hal and a doting mother, mother-in-law, and grandmother, she was also the best friend imaginable to a large group of Westport and Florida friends. She worried about her friends as they encountered their own issues and did everything she could to help them cope. Sybil and I were eternally grateful that we found each other at this stage in our lives. We had hoped for many more years, but that was not to be. The memory of our too short life together will be with me always. Thank you.
We welcome Peter to the bema.
Late in his life, the comedian Stan Laurel reportedly declared, "If there's anybody with a long face at my funeral, I promise you I will never speak to them again." In that spirit, let's try our best not to be sad. Let's celebrate the long and glorious life of Sybil Steinberg. About 25 years ago, when I was working in the healthcare practice at a major PR firm in New York, someone who used to work in publishing joined the practice. When I told this person who my mother was, she exclaimed, "Sybil Steinberg, she's famous." I laughed because I had never thought of my mother as famous, but Sybil was indeed a celebrity in the publishing world, and she earned her celebrity status. Who else would have been invited on short notice to interview Salman Rushdie while he was hiding in London? And when Tom Wolfe arrived at the party celebrating the publication of his Bonfire of the Vanities, he asked, "Where's Sybil Steinberg? She's the only critic who got it right." But those who knew her best, her family, were privileged to see the many endearing sides of Sybil that her legion of fans never saw. For example, when my brothers and I were little, to get us to eat our dinner, Mom would make up stories about a monkey named Abercrombie. Other little things I remember, Mom would put an ice cube in her coffee every morning. And as Rich recalled, she would whistle in a monotone when she heard a piece of music she liked on WQXR. She started the Thursday night tradition of scrambled eggs, hot dogs, and bagels for dinner. And in case you're wondering, of course we put cream cheese on the bagels. Kosher dietary laws be damned. And in recent months, Mom and Matt indulged in the guilty pleasure of watching reruns of NYPD Blue. Sadly, Sybil didn't get to complete the series, but I suspect Bobby Simone is up in heaven filling her in on what happened over the remaining episodes. Anyone who knew Sybil or who read her work or who happened to see her on TV could tell she had an extraordinary mind. That mind remained active right to the very end. After her recent surgery, I spent the night with her in the hospital. During the night, I heard her talking in her sleep. When she awoke, I said to her, "That was some dream you were having. Who were you talking to?" She replied, "What was I saying?" I said, "I don't know. I couldn't make it out." She paused for a moment, and then she asked, "Was I wearing strawberries?" About a week later, when Sybil was in hospice, she opened her eyes and asked where her regular clothes were. I asked her, "Why do you need to get dressed?" She said, "To get out of here." A short time later, she anxiously insisted that she had to get up and move around. I asked her why, and again she replied, "To get out of here." I told her we'd worry about that when the time came. She turned to me, opened her eyes wide, and said, "I prefer to worry." Well, you can stop worrying, Mom. We've got this. You set a great example. You showed us how to live. We will always remember you for that.
And finally, this morning, we welcome Sybil's granddaughter, Rachel, to the bima.
This is the last poem I got to read from my grandmother. It's one of her favorites. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There are midnights all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core.
Thank you so much. Rachel and Jonathan and Richard and Peter and Matt and Mary Lou for such beautiful words. I know that each and every one of us gathered here brings such wonderful memories and stories, so much love for Sybil. And so I encourage you to continue to share those memories and stories out loud today or at the Shiva or in the days and weeks to come. A few announcements as we move toward the conclusion of our service. Immediately following the conclusion of this service, we'll proceed to Temple Israel's cemetery at 225 Richards Avenue in Norwalk for the burial. All are welcome to join us. You can get there on your own or follow the procession. And Shiva will begin immediately following the burial. It will be held at Nancy and Jonathan's home, 1 Bushy Ridge Road here in Westport, till 8 p.m. tonight, with a minyan led by Cantor Mann at 6 p.m. Anyone wishing to make tzedakah contributions, charitable donations, in Sybil's memory, the family invites you to direct your generosity to either the Westport Library, and we know how much Sybil loved that library, to the Fairfield County Hospice House, a wonderful organization here, or to Planned Parenthood. And now I invite you to rise for El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshihim Utahorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Sura Golda, Shehalcha Le'olama, Baal Harachamim, Yastireha B'Seter Knafahav Le'olamim, Vaitzror B'Tzor HaChaim Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata, V'tanuach Bashalom Al Mishkavaha, V'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, we ask that you grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Sybil Steinberg, who has now entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence and in the shadow of your wings. Let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God, you are indeed her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen. And now I invite the grandchildren who will serve as pallbearers to align themselves in the central aisle of our sanctuary. And I'll invite the family to accompany the casket, follow the casket out of the sanctuary to the waiting hearse. Al yitin lamut rablecha, al yanum shomrecha, ye lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha al yad yaminecha. V'mam hashemesh lo yatecha v'yareach.